Good evening, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Scarlet and Gray Podcast. This is episode number 6. I am joined by Jordan Dalton this evening. Nick Lazier is enjoying his honeymoon tonight, so he will not be joining us. But JD, how we doing this evening, man?
Great. Ready to talk about some Ohio State football and preview the Big Ten kickoff. So, yeah, it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, definitely going to be a lot of fun. We got our first guest that we're going to bring on here very shortly. Before we do that, though, we just want to say that the Scarlet and Gray Podcast and Network 216 is proud to be a partner of Underdog Fantasy. And right now, you just want to do fantasy pick'em right now with Underdog Fantasy. All you have to do, it's the easiest way to get in on NFL action. All you have to do is you pick over-unders for some of your favorite games, favorite players, like some of their stats, and you can win up to 20 times your own money in a single night. So all you have to do, just simple, easy to use website. You can do it mobilely or on the website. You just want to pick about two to five players. You can pick them that way. You can do over or unders with scores, but just use code 216 to double your first deposit up to $100 with Underdog Fantasy. And tonight on the channel after us, we do have Down with the Browns. That will be live at 7:30. They are going to really get you guys ready for Thursday night after what was a very disappointing performance Monday night by the Browns. But be sure to drop a subscribe button onto the Twitch channel. You guys can subscribe for free with Amazon Prime. That crown is right there on your screen, so be sure to click that right there. And as we get into it tonight, we are going to bring on our first guest. We are joined by Nathan Baird. He is from Cleveland.com, and he is host of the Buckeye Talk Podcast. Nathan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. We really appreciate you taking just a few minutes out of your evening to join us. And we want to get right down into it. It's been 3 games so far from this Ohio State team. Offense, defensively, what have you seen so far? How do you think the Buckeyes have looked through 3 games to open this year?
I don't think there was a lot of question really about this offense. And obviously Jackson Smith-Njigba getting hurt in the first series of the first game, second series, whatever it was, threw things off a little bit. Any questions that you may have had lingering, I think were answered probably in that Toledo game. But like I said, offensively, I think we knew mostly what this team was probably going to be this season, or at least some degree of what it was going to be. All the questions were really more on defense. What was this Jim Knowles scheme going to look like when he's using Ohio State athletes? Which Ohio State athletes were going to be in those roles? And really even that, by the end of the preseason, we thought we had a pretty good handle on who was going to be where. I think the one revelation since the season started has been Mike Hall and the extent of the role that he is going to play and the impact that he's having early on. But for the most part, it was a lot of questions just about what this was actually going to look like. We got to see them a few times in the preseason at practice, early in practices. Usually it would be a few periods of practice. We got to see one entire shorter practice where they didn't do a lot of team stuff. They weren't going to show us the most interesting parts of the defense. They weren't going to show us the jack stuff. They weren't going to show us some of the other things. And what we've noticed through 3 games is we've been able to glean, I think, what the identity of this Ohio State defense is going to be under Jim Knowles, which is what it was at Oklahoma State, what it was at Duke. I mean, he's going to be aggressive. He's going to be the one who's trying to set the tone, trying to set the agenda for a game. He's using those defensive players as weapons compared to last year, where I thought that defense was back on its heels a little bit too much, especially early in the season, which led to some of the problems. A defense that didn't really know, you guys just seemed a little bit uncertain of what they were supposed to be doing out there. This year, you watch this team, that's not the issue. It doesn't mean they haven't given up some big plays. Doesn't mean there aren't still some things to correct and some areas and some guys who have to improve their performance through these first 3 games. But you look at what Ohio State is on defense and you see the plan and you see the concept that they're working with and the attitude. And I think all those things have been important to maybe raise the floor a little bit on what you should expect this year with this team. Until you saw that, it was still legitimate, I think, to question whether from a talent standpoint, they were going to have enough on defense or whether just that it would take a while for whatever he was trying to do to come together. But my read through 3 games is that they've set a pretty good foundation for what they want this defense to be and what they're going to try to grow into over these next 9+ games.
Yeah, that actually rolls right into my first question for you is they made a really good point on the TV broadcast that Gene Smith, he made it a point to Ryan Day that, hey, if you're going to bring in this high profile defensive coordinator to run the defense, he's going to have full autonomy for running that, implementing his systems, all that type of thing. What have you seen from the team that lends itself to the team buying in and actually taking that next step to becoming a high caliber defense that we didn't see last year?
Yeah, I think that was an important development for Ryan Day, and I give Gene Smith some credit. I think Day might have come to it on his own there, because if you remember going back to last season when 2 games in and they lose to Oregon and things are clearly not right with that defense, one of his big gripes was that now he had to go spend time trying to fix the defense and taking himself away from where he really wants to be, which is in that quarterback room, in the offensive skill groups, scheming things up, developing those players. That is his forte. That's why he was made Ohio State's head coach, was to be that offensive minded guy. And I think he probably, through last year's experience, really through the last 2 years, 20 and 21, that experience probably told him he did need to relinquish some control. You remember that single high defense that Ohio State was running in 2019 works pretty well when you've got Chase Young up front and some of the other guys that they had. But when they lost that level of talent, and now he was kind of determining that that's what they needed to use, then it threw things off a little bit. I think a mistake was probably made when he didn't let Kerry Combs come up with the system he wanted to run and let him build around that. So it was important that they do what they did, which was find someone like Jim Knowles, who has been a head coach before at Cornell, so at a lower level, but he's been a head coach before. He's a veteran, proven defensive coordinator, and just turn that side of the ball over to him. And what I think you've seen from there is guys, not just because he is who he is, but because they are playing the way they play. Whenever we've talked to players through the preseason and going back to the spring when they were just starting to get this defense installed, players were really excited about how aggressive they got to play, about how fast this defense was going to play, about how they weren't asked to think a lot on the field. You know, you're taught things, and then it's just you react. Like you act on instinct, and you go get the ball, you go get the guy who's carrying the ball. Like those sort of things, I think, have helped this defense play with the kind of assertiveness that they want to take to the field. Guys want to be able to be confident out there. That was the biggest buzzword I thought of the whole preseason. Whenever we talked to Jim Knowles, whenever we talked to Ryan Day, whenever we talked to players, increasingly the word that they kept coming back with was confidence, that the defense was playing with confidence. They would go up against this offense in practice, and this offense is hard to match up against and would win a lot of those matchups, but they were winning it enough. They were giving that offense enough trouble that they started to believe in themselves that they could then take that and transition it into games, certainly against the Arkansas States and Toledos of the world, but that it was building towards the defense that they were going to need to have when you get into a Michigan, Penn State, and a potential, playoff situation later this season.
Yeah, Nathan, one of the questions that we have to ask you, since we are on the defense, and there's been a lot of criticism about sophomore cornerback Denzel Burke, and it's getting to a point, his performances that he's had so far to start the season, coming off what was a terrific freshman year, he has not been the same player so far to begin his sophomore year. Do you get the sense, like, are you personally a little bit worried about him and where he is right now in the secondary with the Buckeye defense? And does Jim Knowles or any of his teammates, are they a little bit worried about Denzel Burke? Because this is not the same player that we saw freshman year.
So Knowles and Day and the players were all asked about Denzel last week. We have not had a chance to talk to Denzel since the Arkansas State game, but they were all asked about him last week and expressed a lot of confidence and said, sometimes guys are in a funk. He'll get this figured out. He's proven how good he is, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I was the one kind of saying coming into the year that while I believed in Denzel Burke as a talent, I think we needed to maybe pump the brakes a little bit on assuming that this was already one of the best defensive backs in college football, only because he came had not really played cornerback and comes in as a true freshman and gets thrown in on opening day and keeps that job through some weird circumstances. I think all of those things I said before, though, true freshman, kind of thrown to the wolves, so late comer to the position, I think all those things were kind of baked into the context of how we evaluated him as a freshman. And I think that meant that he probably deserved to be a freshman All-American, but it didn't make me think that he was like on the verge of being an All-American. Like, because that's two very distinct things, because only so many guys get to play enough at real programs to be freshman All-Americans. And I was looking to this year to be like, well, what's the next step? And now you've had a year of film out there that people can potentially exploit. And let's also remember, the better this defense is at stopping the run, which it's been really good so far, the better this defense is and more secure it is over the middle, which it has been compared to last year. The linebacker play that you're getting, the safety play that you're getting is more consistent. So the more that those things are true, I think teams are going to have to try to get some things done one-on-one at the corners. And Burke has not played up to the level that I think he expected, and certainly that I think fans and media were expecting. But I think the whole cornerback group, though, is maybe like the one area that needs the most improvement between here and where Ohio State wants to be at the end of the year. But the other thing to remember is a big factor in that is Jordan Hancock, a guy that we saw in the spring, and we knew he was coming, and then he started to actually flash it on the field. We saw it in the spring game. We had seen it in spring workouts and had been hearing it from people behind the scenes. And he was someone building a lot of momentum in the preseason, and then he gets hurt in camp. And so now all of a sudden you're taking the guy who was probably the third cornerback at worst out of that group, and he has not been able to play. He's been inactive for the first 3 games. So I asked Ryan Day about him specifically last week. He admitted that that's somebody who's supposed to be in the mix right now. That's somebody who's supposed to be on the field. But I would say even more than Evan Pryor getting hurt in camp, this is the absence that's hurting them the most on the field right now, because Pryor would have been the number 3 running back who you don't necessarily need until something happens. And then obviously Dallin Hayden has stepped up there. But on Hancock is the one that I think should be on the field more if he were healthy, and potentially actually helping Ohio State, stop drives and win games. And when they get him back, and it sounded like he might have been close last week, even though he ended up being inactive, they've been careful. We think it's a calf thing, and those sometimes really linger. If they can get him back and get him to where he was in the spring and making that kind of impact, it's going to raise the level of play in that room. Because at every other place in this defense right now, and on the offense too, what we saw this week 1, Josh Proctor misses a tackle, they put in Lathan Ransom, or Teron Vincent gets that whatever that was at halftime of the Arkansas State game. They just pull him and put in, I can't remember if it was, I think it was Tyleik Williams that they put in for him, and Vincent didn't play the second half. Like all these other places, there's a lot of depth on this defense now that wasn't there a year ago, and that lets you play with accountability. It lets you just bench a guy for however long, maybe even the rest of a game, and put the other guy in and let him do his job. They don't have that at cornerback. They only had 6 scholarship cornerbacks to begin with, and the guy, like I said, who's probably number 3 on that list, has been hurt. J.K. Johnson is very green to this, didn't play much last year. He's getting a lot of reps right now, but it's still the one position, whether you're talking Burke or I think the whole group, that needs a boost. And if Hancock can come back healthy, it's going to help that boost.
JD there, man. Got your next question?
Oh, yeah. So just sorry, my dog is crazy.
Mine too. He was barking during the first question.
She's eating my arm. Yeah. So I think my next question for you is, how do you view Cade Stover? So us on the podcast, we're big Cade Stover guys. He played out our alma mater in high school. Huh. And so we got to actually see him growing up, like when he was in 7th, 8th grade playing football, and he was tearing up kids. We're big fans, and this week we actually got to see him utilized on offense, and it was his best game offensively as a Buckeye. So how do you view Cade Stover? I know people in the locker room love him. I know Stroud shouted him out in the press conference and said he's the one guy that he looks up to the most on the team. So I'm just curious what you think of Cade Stover.
I think all those things are true of Cade Stover. He seems like a very, well put together guy, and obviously a versatile athlete, and a guy who's helped this program in a lot of ways and sacrificed some things for this program along the way. And we knew that this was going to be his identity. Time had come for him to take over the top spot in that room. I guess the one word that I would use to describe is maybe perplexed, just because while I like Cade Stover, or I understand why people like Cade Stover as an athlete, he is not the best tight end Ohio State's had. I mean, Jeremy Ruckert was a better tight end, I think. certainly at this stage of Stover's career. Luke Farrell was a better tight end, and those guys did not have a portion in the offense the way that Stover seems to have early on the season. For whatever reason, they decided that this is going to be the year where they throw to the tight end more. And some of that might have just been the Toledo circumstances. That's what opened up in that game. There was a play that I don't even know. I haven't asked CJ Stroud about it. He may get asked about it tomorrow on or Tuesday at the interviews. But that early play where like they sort of faked the play action, and Stover was running this sort of like late release route and just ran by everybody up the seam, and he just hits him for a huge gain, and there's nobody guarding him. And I'm wondering if that's also a dynamic that's playing there, that because Stover was a little bit unproven compared to Farrell and Ruckert, and maybe even people had read things like I was writing or other people on this beat were writing about how the tight end position was kind of unknown because Stover was, a latecomer to the group and he hasn't really shown himself to be a receiver yet. Like maybe other teams didn't respect him. I'm not saying they did it just because they read our stuff. Probably not. But for their own research, watching film, maybe they came to that conclusion and they're just not giving the attention that we're given to some of the other receivers. But I mean, give him credit because even in preseason, we saw a couple things where he made some plays, and we asked, I think, Kevin Wilson about it, and he was still like, well, actually, as a deep ball guy, like he really needs to still come along. He's not where we probably need him to be from vertical threat. He can work underneath okay. And then that game, I mean, twice against Toledo, he came up with, nice just vertical strike catches. And if that's something that can get mixed in, and now you start having to respect all 6 skill position weapons that are on the field for Stroud at a given time, this offense is already pretty lethal, and if he really does sustain this level of play, it makes him even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. Love hearing that about Cade Stover for sure. Nathan, before we let you go, again, we appreciate your time this evening. We have to ask you, the Buckeyes have started 3-0 this year. Where do you think they finish this year? Do they finish with a Big Ten title? And do you think they make the college football playoff? I know it's early, but it's one of these fun predictions we have to ask you.
Oh yeah, we do our predictions too over on the Buckeye Talk podcast and other things we do. And I predicted before the year that they'd go 12-0 and win a Big Ten championship and lose to Alabama in the national championship game. Now then, obviously, those are all just the things that we think in the offseason. Now you start watching the teams play and you start to understand that maybe we oversold Alabama a little bit. Maybe we really undersold where Georgia is right now. I think they still have a good chance because of the way this offense and defense are coming together. There is only what is the stat? It's like the FFFEX. I can't remember the one that like combines the Football Outsider stat and the SP stat that ESPN uses. But there's only 4 teams in the country in the top 15 of both, and they're Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, and Michigan. So Michigan's better than I thought they were going to be. I think that's going to maybe be a pretty great game at the end of the year. I think Jim Harbaugh. By some stretch of unprobability, has handled that quarterback situation well, because that really seemed like something that he was going to drive off a cliff the way it was being handled at first. But I mean, JJ McCarthy's the guy who should have that job, and now he does, and he's doing what he's supposed to do with it. And the other guys they have in that offense, I mean, Blake Corum looks really good. They've got some things going on there. And but I think the other team that I would worry about is Penn State. Penn State's going to play Michigan on October 15th in Ann Arbor, and the winner of that game is the one that Ohio State has to worry about the most then. Because I don't really think these teams underneath, the Michigan States, the Marylands, I don't think they can really play on both sides at Ohio State's level. But Penn State, with what it has defensively in the back end with Joey Porter and Jair Brown and PJ Mustapher up front, the young running backs that they have, like they're starting to put some things together. Nobody in the country really, a few teams in the country have already gone on the road and beaten 2 Power 5 teams, especially ones that are fairly decent in Purdue and Auburn. Not great teams, but like, again, just look across after 3 games, how many teams have 2 wins even that good? There aren't that many on the road. So they've figured some things out after a couple down years. I think we will learn a little bit more about the path that Ohio State has to a championship after that October 15th game in Ann Arbor. Because if one of those teams kind of manhandles the other one, like if Michigan really blows Penn State off the field, that's going to, I think, maybe tell us that last year wasn't a blip for Michigan, and that game at the shoe to end the year could be kind of a classic.
Yeah, absolutely. Love your predictions. And again, Nathan, we appreciate you joining us. Guys, be sure to give Nathan a follow. You can follow him at NW Baird on Twitter. And also be sure to read all of his columns. That is at cleveland.com. He covers Ohio State football for cleveland.com. And he hosts the Buckeye Talk Podcast. Nathan, thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you. So, JD, I mean, we got a lot of really good insight there. And I think the Denzel Burke conversation, Nathan really told us a lot because he's one of the few. I mean, you and I, Nick, we were hyped up on Denzel Burke. I mean, we thought this is where he was going to become one of the top corners in the country. He put out there, he was worried about Denzel Burke. And I thought that was interesting because that's the first time I've really heard that. What were your thoughts on his thoughts on Denzel Burke?
So all the coaches and stuff, they have confidence in him, and I can't be too worried right now, but you know, we were talking about it this weekend is there's a trend here. Mm-hmm. It's not a good trend.
No.
Denzel Burke is young and he's learning his second defense in 2 years. So you can kind of, I don't want to give him a pass, but I gave him a pass last weekend, and then he goes out there and, you know, has a couple big plays given up on it. And yeah, it's interesting because the questions are being raised now.
Yeah.
There's media members bringing it up. I mean, people on Twitter have been complaining about him since the Notre Dame game. But
oh, dude, we heard it in Spaces, man.
Yeah,
they wanted Denzel Burke off the team. Like, I mean, obviously that's extreme. I mean, obviously that's a little extreme, like wanting him off the team. But I mean, you're at the point with Denzel Burke. There's no leash. I mean, there's no leash at this point. As soon as you're getting to the point, you're gonna have. Might get benched, and he might not see the field again for a while. This is just not a good situation that you have with Denzel Burke. I mean, he is graded as one of the worst Buckeyes this year. He's graded at a 60.5.
It's crazy.
And that's him and he's the starter that's played out of everybody on the list, like that Pro Football Focus has. He's played, he is the fifth worst graded, and he's played 139 snaps. The people below him played 79, 27, 17, and 8 snaps. That worries me.
Yeah.
Absolutely worries me.
And I mean, is there anybody below him that has experience that can support that role of being that number one? That's the real question.
That's the issue now. I mean, Cameron Brown, we saw him he didn't look good either. I mean, on Saturday against Toledo. See, this is the thing that scares me. And I know, like, again, we never want to overreact because it's 3 games into a year. But when you're Ohio State and you're getting burned deep, your corners are getting burned deep by some of these teams that, let's just be honest, aren't that good, that's a problem. Like, this is a problem now. And Jordan Hancock, if they believe Jordan Hancock's going to be a starter, that's fantastic. Well, we need him now. I mean, because this secondaries look terrible outside of the safeties. I mean, our corners have not looked good. And quite frankly, since we've lost Jeffrey Okudah, we have not looked good at corner. We really haven't.
Yeah, we even had, and it seems like every year we have a guy that's supposed to take over that role. And we thought Denzel Burke was going to be that guy this year. And
yeah, it has not worked.
It has not worked out. That's not to say he can't figure it out.
Yeah.
By the end of the year. But
man,
it's just been a rough 3 games for him. And like these last 2 games were supposed to be those games where he kind of got back on track and figured it out. But we'll see, man. It's definitely an interesting conversation and something that we've been keeping an eye on.
Yeah. I mean, it's something we've definitely kept an eye on. Before we move over, because there is a lot of good things to talk about the Ohio State Toledo game, and we're going to get into the offense. But before we do, guys, CJ Stroud's having a Heisman Trophy campaign. I mean, he's right now the favorite for the Heisman Trophy, especially after what Bryce Young's performance was against Louisiana Monroe on Saturday, which was not very good. Go right now and get your CJ Stroud tee right now from Homage. We are going to be posting the link again onto the podcast page, and you can give us a follow, which we would really appreciate. That is at the Scarlet and Gray Podcast on Twitter. Oh, JD, he's repping the Cavs. Hey, we don't always have to rep Ohio State on this show.
It's a homage shirt.
Yeah, as long as you got homage, that's all that matters in that NBA Jam shirt.
It's so clean.
I need it. I need that not Mobley, that Garland Mitchell shirt. By the way, Homage is working on Donovan Mitchell Cavs gear, so stay tuned for that. But be sure, again, guys, give us a follow. That is at the SG_podcast on Twitter. I'll post the link on there again to this shirt. You're going to want it. I mean, CJ Stroud just lighting it up. I don't really think, JD, there's really anything else you can really say about him because it's the norm. If he has to get over 300 yards and 5 touchdowns, and if he doesn't, the dude's terrible. Like,
I think he had a 85%, 90% completion percentage against Notre Dame, and they were like, he just had a trash game
because he didn't throw for 300 yards and have more than 2 touchdowns. So, yep, he's bad, terrible player. I mean, he just lights it up, man. I mean, 22 of 27 on Saturday against Toledo, 367 yards, 5 touchdowns. Yeah. I don't even know what to say. I don't. I mean,
that is what we expected to see in week 1. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it took them 2 weeks to get the offense rolling like that.
Yeah.
I didn't expect them to score 77, but
exactly.
they lit it up. They scored more in the Toledo game than they did the first 2 games combined.
Mm-hmm. I was shocked.
And their offense just looked incredible. And we punted once the entire game, maybe twice once the backups came in, but it was fun to watch. Stroud has the best arm in college football. I don't think you can deny that. His accuracy, his arm strength. He's
the number 1 pick.
Yeah, he's phenomenal.
To me, it's not there's a huge debate, and I'm not going to get into too much draft talk because I could talk about the NFL draft for hours. But there's a huge debate right now, obviously, between Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, and Will Anderson, the Alabama outside linebacker / defensive end, who's also a stud. If you have the number 1 pick and you need a quarterback, to me, it's a no-brainer. And that's not being biased. That's just Stroud has everything you want. The only thing you could make the argument he doesn't have, he's not great mobile-wise, which I think you need at the NFL level, but I don't think that's a huge deal. The other concern for me is just his frame. Kind of like with Bryce Young, you just would like to see him bulk up a little bit. But, I mean, C.J. Stroud, a 91.8 grade against Toledo. I don't even know how you can't give him a 99. I don't know how they grade it, but 91.8 grade for this year. He's graded at a 91. He's just been absolutely fantastic. Now, we're going to get into the wide receiver debate because this is a pretty fun conversation. And if we had more time with Nathan, we would obviously ask him this. But the wide receiver conversation at Ohio State is starting to get pretty interesting because right now, and Nick's not on the show, but his boy that he predicted for a breakout season, Marvin Harrison Jr., is second in college football in receiving touchdowns. And if it wasn't, and he's played one less game. There's a wide receiver at Vanderbilt, I believe, that currently has the record. So that's kind of where we're at with that. But JD, Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming came back. He played well. Emeka Egbuka. You now have Jackson Smith-Njigba healthy. He only had 2 catches for 33 yards. 6 catches, Marvin Harrison Jr., 102. Jaden Ballard, another wide receiver, 4 for 113. Egbuka, 7 for 116. Fleming, 3 for 23 and 2 touchdowns. Who's wide receiver 1 in this offense? Is it everybody? Is everybody a wide receiver 1 in this offense?
This was what we were missing, right? The first 2 games of the season was the wideout room at full strength.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't double team anybody on this offense. Nope. And we talked about it when Nathan was on the pod. We just brought up Cade, but he had a great game. And you add him to the mix. If he's making catches, getting open down the field, this offense is unstoppable. Because the wide receivers are so good.
It's not fair, man.
I saw somebody tweeted, it was either week 1 or week 2, and they're an NFL guy, and they're I should not be jealous of the Browns, or like I should not be jealous of Ohio State's receiving room being better than like an NFL receiving room or whatever.
Jake Bird, from the OBR said that, and I thought that was hilarious. You know the part about that, because again, I don't want to talk. I want to focus on Ohio State for this one, but it's just so funny that he mentioned that because it's rather sad to think about. It really is, because there is so much NFL talent that Ohio State has at wide receiver. I mean, I think we're going to see this year. Jackson Smith-Njigba is the guy that everyone is going to have their main focus on. I just think it is because he's the guy who's projected top 5, top 10 NFL draft pick. You could, if he's below that, I would be shocked. But you're going to have to take guys away. And I feel like he's the guy they're going to try and take away. But you have so many guys in this offense that can beat you. You mentioned Cade, obviously, but Trayvion Henderson, Mayan Williams, Jaden Ballard, who came out of nowhere. I mean, you have so many weapons in this offense. There's nobody that can defend them all. I don't even think the best secondary, I don't even know who has the best secondary in college football just because, I don't study it that in depth. I don't know. I honestly think we could see a scenario, and we're starting to. Someone's different is leading this team every week. Week 1, it was Mbuka. Week 2, it was Marvin Harrison Jr. Week 3, it was Mbuka again, but Jaden Ballard was right there. I mean, next week we might see Jackson Smith-Njigba. Or maybe it'll be Julian Fleming. I mean, that's the thing with this Buckeye team, man. There's not a guy that you can key in on because any of them can go for 100 yards and 2 scores. Any of them.
Yeah. It's insane. We could go. We could go all day talking about the wide receiver room. Marvin Harrison Jr. was spectacular. He looks NFL ready out there right now.
Which makes sense.
Yeah,
his dad.
Or anything, but
his dad's one of the great. Yeah, his dad's one of the great wide receivers. Since we are, because we'll wrap up with the wide receivers and move on here. But at the wide receiver position, are the 3 starters? This is where I'm at with it. I think it's Jackson Smith-Njigba, Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr. Are those the 3 you start? Do you put Fleming there? Like, how would you, if you're Ryan Day, how do you do that?
Order, I'd say Marvin Harrison's the one right now, just because.
Ooh, okay.
Just because of pure volume
and
production, he's just. You just gotta look at his size. He's the biggest receiver on the field. 6'4", 200 pounds, and he's really fast for his size. He's got amazing hands. You can throw him the ball in the red zone. You can throw it in open field. He can run deep. Like, I think he just has the complete package. And then I think JSN is number 2, and then Mbuka. But I like how they're using Mbuka out of the slot now. That they had been working him. They've been working him more out of the slot the first 2 games because like JSN works out of the slot too. But they had Mbuka working out of the slot since JSN was injured, and he filled that role really well. He's a really fast, twitchy, can create a lot of yardage in space. So he fills that role really well. And when JSN's gone, he's gonna step in and be probably pretty productive. Like
he might be pretty productive, I would say.
Just from what we've seen so far, and he's still really young, right? He's a sophomore, so he's looking really good. So I think Marvin Harrison, I think he took it over, dude. I think he took over number 1, and that wasn't really what we were talking about the first 2 weeks of the year. We're talking about like how Mbuka took over wide receiver 3 from Fleming. And now it seems like there's just been this whole change of the guard where Marvin Harrison Jr. looks like the best receiver in the room. And that's no knock on JSN. Like, he's hurt. He's injured. There's a reason he hardly played and hardly got the ball. But at the same time, when he was on the field, the defense is still keen on him.
They have to.
And in that, I think that's part of the reason why the other receivers had such big games. And it's going to be interesting as the season dwindles down towards the end, where where other teams feel the biggest threat it comes from our offense, whether it's the run game or Marvin Harrison Jr. on the outside or JSN or Buka or whoever. It's going to be really cool to see the transformation of the offense, because like a lot of these guys haven't got to play with Stroud like a large amount. Like JSN was on the field. He was our leading receiver last year.
Which is hard to believe when you have Chris Olave, when you had Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson on that team too.
Yeah, and those guys
are remarkable.
Those guys are amazing. But yeah, I think that will be the biggest. Like, we're gonna have to come back to this as the season, is wrapping up and see where we're at, because Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a Buckeye next year.
That's beautiful to think about. So is Emeka Egbuka.
And possibly Julian Fleming is going to be a Buckeye next year.
Jaden Ballard.
Yeah. So
Brandon Innes.
It's just going to be interesting to see those guys, where they're at the end of the year, how teams are viewing the offense as a whole, because this offense can hurt you in so many ways, whether it's through the air, through the ground. Hopefully Trayvion's, better soon.
I'm glad you brought up Trayvion. Ryan Day was actually asked about Trayvion Henderson tonight. Not expecting him to miss significant time or anything, not a long-term injury. He expects him to play against Wisconsin.
Did they say what the injury was?
He didn't really clarify. He was asked about Josh Proctor. He was asked about a couple others, including Trayvion Henderson. He was not worried about the injury itself.
And I don't think they were trying to rush to get him back in the game, because obviously we didn't need him.
There was no reason to put him in. I want to give a shout out actually to someone, and I'm going to be honest. If you knew about him, fantastic. I did not know about Dalen Hayden. Did not know about him at all. And he is the first Ohio State running back this year, and this is true, to rush for 100 yards this year in a game. And he did it. So congratulations to him. I don't know how many opportunities he's going to get this year. I don't, just because, you have Trayvion Henderson and Mayan Williams. Good to know, though. It's just endless talent. There's just endless talent at Ohio State. Before we move on to Wisconsin, because I do want to take a decent amount of time and cover the Badgers since it is the Big Ten opener, we do just have to talk about the stats Ohio State put up on Saturday. And if we didn't, then there's something wrong with us. So team stat-wise, Ohio State, JD, you tweeted it from the podcast page, and that's at S&G Podcast on Twitter. Man, it was like they were video game stats. Ohio State, 763 total yards, 77 points that they scored against a Toledo team that came in with a top 5 defense. Yes, I know who they played against, but Toledo is not – I don't think they're a pushover. I don't. I think they got a really good quarterback in Daquan Finn, who after this year should transfer and start at a Power 5 school because he has the talent to do so. But, you are just 11 of 13 on third down. You're 1 of 1 on fourth down. See, 482 yards passing, 281 rushing, 5 touchdowns rushing. Oh, my goodness. 6 touchdowns passing. It was just incredible to me. This is truly – I don't know if you agree with this, JD. I think for me, it's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen any Ohio State offense put up.
Yeah, it was efficient. It was explosive. There were big plays. We ran the ball well. We dominated up front. We won the line of scrimmage from the first snap. The biggest, I think, negative of the game was, we talked about it last week, and we talked about it before the Notre Dame game, was how these mobile quarterbacks are going to give issues to this team. And that was something that we saw was pretty evident when Daquan Finn was taking off and running and using his feet. And he was the best player on the field at some points as just a pure athlete. He was making plays. He was trying to keep Toledo in the game. So shout out to him, because he did look really, really good on the field.
And he can play. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. I'm not just saying. I firmly believe he could start a Power 5 school. I just think he's that kind of talent.
Yeah, he looked really good. Yeah, but yeah, the offense was so efficient, and it like the bleeding never stopped for Toledo. It was just a touchdown. I mean, it was 11 touchdowns of offense, and when I tweeted that it was video game numbers out, there was 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and we had 700 yards of offense. Like, it was like one of those things. You see it on the TV, and you're just like, does that say 700? That doesn't look real. But yeah, I mean, and it's not some like team that I mean, I'm sure we paid Toledo to play us, but they're not some F whatever school that is, I don't even, Charleston Southern or whatever. They're not like a small, super small school.
Toledo's had success in the past, so I mean, it's not like.
They won the MAC last year, right?
I believe they did, yeah.
And so they're pretty solid, and yeah, we just dominated from start to finish. So it was good to see, and it was good to get that type of win, get the offense flowing in rhythm, which we didn't get in the Arkansas State game, but
not at all. I didn't think we did now.
Yeah, getting that, I don't even know what you can call it, like a boost into Big Ten play is huge. It's going to be a catalyst for hopefully better things to come. And if we're putting up 50 against Wisconsin next week, you can look back. Man. You can look back at the Toledo game, and you can be like, I don't know if we're putting up 50 if we didn't have such a like explosive game against Toledo. So
we'll be giddy, man. If we put up 50 against Wisconsin, we'll all be really hyped. I mean, as we should. Before we move on, one player from this game that you give the player, like, say was the player of the game, either on offense or defense.
I think it was a toss-up between Stroud and Marvin Harrison. They kept Stroud in the game way longer than I thought they would.
I didn't understand it personally, but hey,
yeah,
he didn't get injured, so can't complain about it.
They protected it really well, so I wasn't too worried about it. But yeah, Marvin Harrison just looked unreal. So I'm a little bit biased towards the receivers, so I think I'm going to give it to Marvin Harrison. He made every catch.
It's fair. It's fair. I'm going to give it to the guy who's on our screen. I'm going to give it to Dalen Hayden. I am. I mean, this is a guy who he had 17 carries, 108 yards, and a touchdown. We might not see him on the field again this year. If everything goes well, no injuries, we shouldn't see him on the field this year again. But he played really well on Saturday night, and this is a guy, again, who I will admit, and I apologize to Dalen, that I did not know he would see the field or anything along those lines. So have to shout out him. He's my player of the game. Now, JD, we get to move on, and we're going to play.
Before we move on, I want to give you a pass for not knowing who he is.
Oh, that's fair.
A lot of fans, myself included, we don't look past that first string offense. We don't look into the depth chart unless we know we have like a high recruit waiting in the wings that we know about.
Correct.
So and we don't expect our first string players to get hurt. So maybe next year we can get a little bit more backup study in and really spice up the off-season podcast with the backups to watch for.
Hey man, yeah. Oh, it's gonna.
But these guys might not ever play, so this is like the same thing with Xavier Johnson. Like we didn't know who he was before he scored a touchdown against Notre Dame. So it's cool. Yeah. It's cool to see.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into our Big Ten opener opponent. That's gonna be Saturday night, 7:30. A foe that we have had some Big Ten championship battles with comes to the shoe. The Wisconsin Badgers. The Wisconsin Badgers for a long time have not had a quarterback that I would say can really pressure your defense. I think this year they might. I think Graham Mertz is a quarterback that's very solid. He's the reason why Jack Cohn, who was Notre Dame's quarterback last year, played very well for Notre Dame, transferred from Wisconsin, is because Graham actually took that starting job from him. 697 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Throwing the ball is not what Wisconsin, that's not their bread and butter. That's not what they're really known for. But they've never had a guy that can really make you want to respect that position. It's always been the running game. But JD, they got a quarterback. And this is a guy that he can make plays for Wisconsin. Everyone wants to focus on the running game, but I don't think you want to sleep on the quarterback. I really don't. Normally in the past you can with Wisconsin. I don't think you can anymore.
Yeah. They're coming off a loss against Washington State, where they dominated on offense. They had 400 yards of offense compared to Washington State's 253. They passed the ball for over 200 yards, rushed it for almost 200 yards. Yards per play was about equal, but Washington State only converted 2 of 11 third downs for the game. Wisconsin converted about 50%, 8 of 15, and they still lost. So they had
remarkable.
Yeah, they still had a really good, productive offensive day, but they just couldn't punch it in the end zone when it mattered. Both teams turned the ball over 3 times, and Washington State's not a powerhouse by any means, and they lost this game. So it'll be interesting to see with Wisconsin how they attack Ohio State, whether it's through the ground early, trying to control that time of possession, because against Washington State, they had the ball for almost 40 minutes of the entire game. Their time of possession was 38 minutes. Washington only had the ball 21 minutes. And we talked about it with it being an issue in the Notre Dame game. If Ohio State's offense doesn't get rolling early, and you're passing the ball a lot, your time of possession is very, very limited. As a pass-heavy offense, if you're not completing passes, gaining first downs, and Wisconsin is going to take full advantage of having that ball, and they're gonna chip away 3-4 yards a carry, and try to wear us down. So I think the key to the game is going to be the same key to the game as the
Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's going to be a very similar game. I think the biggest difference is last week. That offense finally caught fire. They had the fire emoji underneath.
Yeah, I get it.
CJ Stroud, every time he throws the ball, his hand's smoking a little bit, and I think that might be the difference. Is we're gonna have a completely healthy receiver room, which looked like it helped a little bit last week. So, yeah,
Wisconsin, we know where it begins and ends. I don't expect them to do. I don't expect them to do anything. That I don't expect them to just try. They're going to absolutely try and control the clock. But I'll say this: if Ohio State comes out, if Wisconsin comes out and goes 3-and-out a couple times in a row, this game might be over pretty quick. Yeah. Wisconsin though, running back, man, every year Wisconsin has a running back or 2 or 3. The endless line of running backs that they've had is just ridiculous. Jonathan Taylor, obviously, Ron Dane, Anthony Davis. They've just had an endless supply, it seems like, of running backs. And now you have Braylon Allen, who this kid's amazing. He's only a sophomore. So far this year, he already has 332 yards, 5 touchdowns, 6.6 yards a carry. Ran for 1,200 yards last year, which was 4th in Wisconsin history as a freshman, which is just nuts. They also are it's not just Braylon Allen though that they have at running back. That's the remarkable thing. They also have a former Clemson transfer, and that's Ches Malusi, who was actually their starter last year, but ended up tearing his ACL, and that's when Braylon Allen took over. Yeah. So Wisconsin's absolutely loaded at running back, absolutely stacked at running back, and it begins and ends with the running game and that offensive line. Joe Thomas is the greatest Wisconsin offensive lineman in their history. That offensive line that Wisconsin has every year, it's like these dudes are just growing up on farms and moving to Wisconsin, and then they're just they're just recruiting them, man. I mean, it's nuts. You know, like if you can find a way, I don't expect them to stop these guys. I don't, because asking a defense that is new like this, because it is a new defensive scheme they're running, to stop arguably one of the best, Braylon Allen, one of the best running backs in the country, not to mention one of the best duos in the country. I don't think you can stop them, but you got to find a way to contain them. That's all. I mean, that's what you have to do if you're going to win this game, because that's all they have is their run game. They can beat you passing the ball like Graham Metz can do it. But and I mean, he'll make you honor his pass, but Wisconsin doesn't want to throw. They would run it 50, 60 times if they could.
Right. That brings us into the strength of the Ohio State defense. So Nathan touched on it earlier. The run defense for Ohio State this year has been head and shoulders dangerous shampoo. No, it's been so much better than it has been previously in like the previous years. Mike Hall Jr. has come out of nowhere and has been absolutely phenomenal inside. And then we have a lot of really good players that are rotating in and out. Jack Sawyer, I don't even know what position he's playing right now, but I
think he's playing the Leo/Jack position in this defense, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and they're moving him everywhere, and he's making plays. And Tommy Eichenberg has really stepped up, and I think Tommy Eichenberg is going to be in the conversation for some linebacker awards at the end of the year. He's looked so good. But this is going to be a game where the secondary and the corners, more specifically, are going to be asked to play a lot of man, because we're going to be loading up the box, and that's going to bring us into the weakest part of our defense so far, which has been our corners. So really taking advantage of our opportunities on offense, and our corners are going to have to step up this game, because there's going to be a lot of times where play action, first and 10, they're going to take a deep shot, and those corners are going to get tested. So I think that'll be something we need to watch for. I know I'm going to be taking notes on it early. I'm going to be keying on those corners for sure. But I'm excited. It's, Big Ten football's back. I know there's been a couple games so far that have been played, but for Ohio State, this is our first in-conference foe. So I'm excited to see us get to a good start and really start hot. I think that's going to be a big thing, is putting a touchdown on the board first is going to go a long way, I think, in this game, because I don't think Wisconsin has nowhere near the firepower we do on offense.
Not even close. It's all in their running backs. You have to contain the line of you've mentioned it. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, a lot more. The line of scrimmage is what matters. You have to control the line of scrimmage against a team that wants to just run the football nonstop. That's all Wisconsin wants to do. That's what they're mainly good at. That's really just what you have to do at this point. I mean, right now, Ohio State is 17.5-point favorites against Wisconsin. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's a little high? What are your thoughts on that in itself?
I usually say hammer the under, but no, I think that is a fair amount, and I think they're going to cover. I don't see it being a super close game, but Wisconsin's game plan is going to be to come in there, control time of possession, run the ball, keep the score low. That's what they want to do. That's how they're going to play it. I will say Wisconsin started the season off. Yeah, so they played Washington State week 2.
Mhm.
Last week they played New Mexico State, who is not very good. But they did get their offense going last week, which with the same vein as we talked with Toledo in Ohio State, they got some confidence last week. They rushed the ball for 260 yards, passed the ball for 330 yards. Time of possession again over 30 minutes, so they controlled the clock for over half the game.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have the ball as much because they were scoring. They scored 66 points. So it'll be interesting with the complete contrast of the offenses, how Wisconsin comes out and plays, because they need, if they want to make a run at a Big Ten title, this is their first goal, is knocking off Ohio State. So I don't expect them to come in and lay down. That's not Big Ten football for the most part.
Not how Wisconsin plays, man. Wisconsin's a team that wants they want a game where it comes down to the line of scrimmage. I mean, we'll talk about that probably 500 more times. I mean, before this week is all over with. As far as overall, Ohio State, Wisconsin, there's been some great matchups over the years. I remember the Braxton Miller Hail Mary, for sure. It is at Ohio State. Obviously, we talked about Ohio State as big-time favorites in this game. JD, what's your prediction for this game? Now, first, do you think the Buckeyes cover the spread? Ohio State is 1-2 against the spread this year. Do you think they cover on Saturday night?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they are starting to hit the stride offensively, where we talked about it with Notre Dame, we talked about it with Arkansas State, and it finally came to fruition with Toledo. But they get into this rhythm offensively that it almost seems impossible for the defense to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw it in the Rose Bowl last year, and it didn't hit until like the second or third quarter, where their offense hits that rhythm and they can't stop scoring. It's just impossible to stop for some reason. And Stroud is so efficient with the football. So I think that we're going to see it this game. I think we're going to see it for the rest of the season, until the Michigan game. I think the Michigan game is the game that the offense is going to have to play perfect, and we're starting to see how dangerous we can be. So, yeah, I think we're going to cover the spread pretty easily this week.
What's your prediction on the score?
45-14.
Okay. All right. That's somewhat similar to mine. I think 48-21. I think Wisconsin is going to score. I think it'll be early. And then I think Ohio State's they're going to see this. They're going to see this Wisconsin offense, and they're going to learn their tendencies, and then they're going to shut them down. Like, I think Braylon Allen. I think Braylon Allen's going to have a solid game. Normally he does, but I think you're going to find a way to contain him. And I just think C.J. Stroud just has too many weapons on offense, and Ohio State's going to end up winning this game, and we'll end up going to 4-0. But either way, it's going to be a lot of fun, guys. And to be announced, possibly we are looking to have a pregame and possibly halftime spaces on Twitter on Saturday to get you guys ready for the game. So we will be announcing that. It looks like we might be doing that, but for you guys to be a part of it, you have to give us a follow. That is the S&G Podcast on Twitter. We love hosting spaces to be able to talk with you guys, get your thoughts on the Buckeyes, but also the Wisconsin Badgers as well. So just a reminder also to thank everyone that's tuned into this episode of Scarlet and Gray Podcast. Special shout out to Nathan Baird for joining us. Remember, you guys can read his columns at Cleveland.com, and he's also host of the Buckeye Talk Podcast. So we appreciate him joining us, guys. Remember, Underdog Fantasy is a proud partner of Network 216 and the Scarlet and Gray Podcast. Get your prop bets in tonight. There are 2 Monday Night Football games on tonight. Ooh. So you can go in and get your prop bets. I know Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown connection has been pretty lethal to start the year. You guys confident in that? Go put some money down on it. You can double your first deposit up to $100 when you use code 216. Thank you all for tuning into the Scarlet and Gray podcast tonight. We have, as soon as we sign off, we have Down with the Browns. You're going to want to make sure you tune in for it. Everyone needs to air their grievances after what was just a horrific.
Don't bring that energy onto this podcast.
Yep. Hey, but I'm just saying, you guys can all go air your grievances with Christian, Mac, Manny, and Matty G. Thank you guys all for tuning in. This has been the Scarlet and Gray podcast. Go Bucks, baby.
OH.
I-O.